Recent developments surrounding Venezuela have taken a new turn following an extensive interview given by former U.S. President Donald Trump. In the interview, Trump discussed the future of U.S. involvement in Venezuela, the control of the country's oil resources, and how long American oversight could continue. His remarks have drawn international attention and raised serious questions about sovereignty, energy politics, and global power dynamics. The interview comes after dramatic events in Venezuela, where U.S. forces carried out a sudden military operation that resulted in the detention of President Nicolás Maduro and his wife. This operation effectively ended Maduro's rule and triggered a rapid shift in political control. Following these events, Washington began working closely with new authorities in Caracas, setting the stage for a deep and possibly long-lasting U.S. presence in the country. In his interview, Trump was asked directly how long the United States plans to remain involved in Venezuelan affairs. Rather than offering a clear timeline, he responded that the situation would take time and that U.S. oversight could last for years. He suggested that rebuilding Venezuela would not be quick or simple and described the effort as something that would require sustained involvement rather than a short transition period. Trump framed the U.S. role as both political and economic. He repeatedly emphasized that Venezuela is a country with enormous natural wealth, particularly oil, and argued that this wealth should be used as part of the rebuilding process. According to Trump, the United States plans to play a central role in managing and selling Venezuelan oil as a way to generate revenue and stabilize the country's economy. One of the most striking points in the interview was Trump's discussion of oil shipments. He said Venezuela would hand over up to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States. This oil, previously restricted due to sanctions and political tensions, would be refined and sold through U.S. channels. Trump claimed this move could help lower energy prices while also funding reconstruction efforts inside Venezuela. Venezuela holds some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world, but years of mismanagement, sanctions, and infrastructure decay have severely reduced production. Trump acknowledged these challenges, saying that restoring the oil sector would take time, investment, and technical expertise. U.S. companies, he suggested, could play a major role in reviving production and modernizing facilities. However, Trump offered few details about how oil revenues would be distributed or how decisions would be made. Critics argue that U.S. control over another country's oil sales raises serious concerns about national sovereignty. Supporters, on the other hand, claim that international oversight is necessary to prevent corruption and ensure that revenues are used effectively. The political future of Venezuela remains uncertain. During the interview, Trump did not commit to a timeline for new elections. He avoided direct answers on when Venezuelans would be able to vote for a permanent government, saying instead that stability must come first. This lack of clarity has fueled debate among international observers and human rights organizations. Trump also addressed the question of leadership in Caracas. Instead of backing opposition figures who had claimed victory in earlier elections, the United States chose to work with existing senior officials as interim authorities. This decision has been controversial, with critics arguing that it undermines democratic principles, while others see it as a pragmatic step to avoid chaos. Inside Venezuela, reactions have been mixed. Supporters of Maduro have taken to the streets in protest, demanding his release and condemning U.S. involvement. Others, frustrated by years of economic hardship, hope that international intervention could bring stability, jobs, and access to basic goods. The humanitarian situation in Venezuela remains fragile. Millions of citizens have faced shortages of food, medicine, and electricity over the past decade. Inflation and unemployment have driven mass migration. Whether the new political arrangement improves daily life for ordinary Venezuelans will depend largely on how resources are managed and how quickly services are restored. International reaction to the Trump administration's statements and actions in Venezuela has continued to grow, reflecting deep concern and uncertainty across the world, and several governments have voiced unease about the long-term implications of sustained American involvement in Venezuelan affairs, particularly after the removal of President Nicolás Maduro and the United States' assertion of control over key aspects of the country's economy and resources. Russia, a traditional ally of Caracas, has sharply criticized the situation as a risky escalation that could destabilize the region and undermine international norms. This criticism reflects broader geopolitical tensions and deep mistrust between Moscow and Washington. China, another major global power with extensive investments in Venezuelan oil and infrastructure, is closely monitoring developments. Beijing has substantial economic interests in Venezuela, having provided loans, financing, and contracts over the past decade. Officials in China have cautioned that any disruption to established commercial ties or a perception of U.S. dominance could further strain relations and complicate negotiations over future energy cooperation. Across Latin America, responses have been mixed. Some governments have welcomed the promise of stability and potential reconstruction after years of political conflict and economic downturn in Venezuela. Others, particularly in regional alliances, have raised alarms about foreign intervention and the precedent it sets for national sovereignty. These nations are closely evaluating how the situation could impact trade, security cooperation, and migration, as people continue to flee hardship and seek refuge across borders. Within the United States, the debate has grown more intense. Lawmakers have raised questions about the scope and duration of executive authority in foreign engagements. A number of senators from both major political parties have advocated for increased congressional oversight of what they describe as potentially open-ended commitments abroad. Some proposals focus on setting limits on military actions without legislative approval, while others emphasize aligning long-term strategic goals with domestic priorities. One area of particular attention has been the structure of the United States oil strategy in Venezuela. Energy markets reacted cautiously to announcements that the U.S. plans to import millions of barrels of Venezuelan crude that were previously restricted under sanctions. Following these statements, global oil prices saw moderate declines, suggesting that traders are factoring in increased supply expectations even as geopolitical risks remain. Analysts note that Venezuela's oil industry has long suffered from underinvestment, aging infrastructure, and serious operational challenges. Restoring production to earlier levels, even with foreign investment, could take years rather than months. This means that while access to Venezuelan oil could eventually influence global energy markets, immediate impacts may be limited by logistical and technical hurdles. The strategy of incorporating Venezuelan oil into U.S. markets raises both economic and political questions. Officials have suggested that selling these barrels at market prices could generate significant revenue, portions of which might be used to support economic recovery and public services in Venezuela. However, observers caution that issues of transparency, oversight, and fair distribution remain unresolved. Without clear safeguards, some critics fear that new forms of dependency could emerge, benefiting foreign interests more than Venezuelan citizens. Legal and ethical concerns also remain part of the discussion. International law experts have debated the legality of extended foreign oversight and control of national resources following a military operation. They emphasize that sovereignty and non-interference are core principles of international law, and prolonged foreign management of a country's assets raises complex questions about consent, legitimacy, and accountability. A critical issue moving forward is the timeline for Venezuela's political restoration. Although interim authorities currently recognized by Washington have expressed a willingness to cooperate, there is still no definitive plan for nationwide elections or a full transition to civilian governance. Observers note that any clear timeline will play a major role in shaping how both Venezuelans and the international community judge the legitimacy of the current arrangement. Meanwhile, negotiations between Venezuela's state-owned oil company and U.S. counterparts are reportedly progressing. Officials have indicated that any agreements will follow commercial terms and international pricing standards, emphasizing expectations of fair compensation for Venezuelan crude. These talks suggest that, despite political uncertainty, economic actors on both sides are seeking practical solutions, though significant challenges remain. Beyond the region, this situation has prompted countries in Europe and elsewhere to reassess their strategic positions. While not directly involved, these nations are watching closely due to potential effects on global energy supply and geopolitical balance. International organizations and economic blocs have called for diplomatic solutions and respect for established international norms as events continue to unfold. Humanitarian concerns remain significant. Venezuela's population has endured years of economic hardship, shortages of essential goods, and large-scale migration. While the possibility of increased investment and stability may offer hope to some, living conditions for many citizens remain difficult. Human rights advocates stress that any long-term strategy must prioritize the welfare and rights of ordinary Venezuelans, rather than focusing solely on geopolitical or economic interests. As developments continue, attention will also turn to how international legal bodies and regional organizations respond. Questions surrounding legitimacy, accountability for recent military actions, and respect for sovereign decision-making are expected to be debated in diplomatic forums and potentially through formal international processes. From an economic perspective, changes in Venezuela's oil dynamics could reshape global trade flows. Traditionally, much of Venezuela's oil was exported to Asian markets, but the new direction appears increasingly oriented toward Western refiners, particularly in the United States. This shift could influence long-term demand patterns and strategic relationships within the global energy sector. At the same time, infrastructure challenges remain a major obstacle. Venezuela's oil sector faces deteriorating refineries, aging pipelines, and damaged facilities. Rebuilding this infrastructure would require massive investment and years of sustained effort, especially within a politically sensitive environment. As Venezuela's political and economic future continues to unfold, the evolving relationship between the United States and Venezuela is likely to shape regional dynamics for years to come. How international actors cooperate or clash over this situation will test long-standing principles of diplomacy, sovereignty, and international law. For now, the Trump administration's statements and actions provide the strongest indication yet that U.S. involvement in Venezuela is intended to be long-term rather than temporary. Whether this approach leads to economic recovery, deeper foreign influence, or renewed global tensions remains uncertain as further developments continue to emerge.